Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Henrietta Sees It Through, News from the Home Front in World War II Britain. February 10th, 1943. My dear Robert, there was a time when I preferred summer to winter. Feeling the cold as I do, the approach of January, February, and March used to fill me with dread. And soon after Christmas, when the east winds begin to blow, I would get what Charles calls my sick monkey look, and wrapped in misery and shawls, remain, like the hibernating toad, in a state of suspended animation until the first really warm spring day recalled me to life. But all that has changed now. Since I took to gardening, winter has become my favorite season. You may well ask why, Robert, and the answer is easy to give. It is because in winter there are no weeds. Even my enemy, the bindweed, withers off at the top into dead, thin strings, and though it is still lurking underground in all its coiling horror, a little concentrated wishful thinking easily persuades me that it is gone forever. This excites in me a frenzy of enthusiastic tidying, and the edges of the grass are cut, the gravel paths raked, and if a dead leaf dares to lie for one instant upon the lawn, it is whisked away and plunged into a large pit dug for the purpose, where it lies rotting with its fellows, and is transformed in the course of time, we hope, into rich leaf mold. When I persuaded Charles, who hates the garden and looks at it as seldom as possible, to inspect what I had done, he said it was so neat it reminded him of an operating theater. Charles has often been heard to remark that it would save his money and my time if the whole thing were laid down in concrete. What would we do with such a great expanse of concrete? I said to him on one occasion when he had made this shattering assertion. But Charles always has an answer. We would invite our friends to roller skate on it, he said. With no weeds rearing their ugly heads and the autumn leaves safely tucked away in their pit, I am hard put to it to find employment in the garden just now. To rest from my labors I do not dare, for muscles must be kept strong and lumbar regions supple against the spring offensive. Just lately I have been making a brick path. This is fascinating work up to a point, the point being where the whole brick has to be made into a half brick. When proper bricklayers do this, it looks easy. They just take the little trowel thing that they spread mortar with and give the brick a tap, and it falls neatly into two pieces. I tried tapping my brick with an ordinary gardening trowel, and nothing happened at all. Then our gardener came along. Our gardener and I, like King James of the great Sir Walter, think but rawly of each other, and never ask each other's advice if we can possibly avoid it. The gardener, with a pitying smile, stood and watched me stagger with bricks from one end of the terrace to the other. Watching me garden is one of our gardener's favorite pastimes. He never seems to tire of it and spends hours out of the 2 days he is supposed to work for us engaged in this happy pursuit. "Layin' bricks?" he said kindly after about 10 minutes. "Yes." "You know how's yours nevers lay one whole brick alongside another whole brick, don't ye?" "Of course." "Do you know the way to split bricks?" Yes, I think so." "I'll show ye," cried the gardener, delighted at my hesitation, and dropped the hoe which he carries about with him as a sort of badge of office, then seized my brick, gave it a sharp tap with the trowel, and it fell in half. "That's how 'tis done," he said conceitedly. I was very much annoyed by this sudden display of efficiency, and as soon as he had gone, I took the trowel and gave my brick a tremendous whack with it. Nothing happened, so I turned it over and tried the other side. Again nothing happened, except that a small piece chipped off and flew into my eye. By this time my blood was up, and I went and got the axe out of the tool shed. Laying the brick down, I raised the axe above my head with both hands and delivered a stunning blow which might have been effective if it had not missed its mark and buried itself deeply in the ground. "What are you doing, Henrietta?" said Lady B., who often walks into our garden in the afternoons to give me a word of cheer. "Breaking bricks in half," I said breathlessly. "But, my dear, that's quite the wrong way to do it," said Lady B. "All you have to do is just tap it with a trowel like this." "Exactly," I said after she had made several abortive attempts, and I returned to my brick with redoubled fury. I whacked and banged and scored several direct hits as well as some near misses, while Lady B uttered little cries of encouragement. But apart from the fact that we both got little chips in our eyes and the brick soon ceased to look like a brick, nothing happened. Then the axe broke and we went indoors and had tea. Next day, I got a professional bricklayer to come and finish the job for me. It took him about 10 minutes. When the gardener came again, he inspected the new path. I could see he was disgusted to find the job so neatly done. "Woman's work," he said scornfully, trying to raise a brick with the toe of his boot. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" I said smugly. "Where be the axe gone to?" said the gardener suspiciously. "Gone to be sharpened," I said. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. April 14th, 1943. My dear Robert, now the evenings are longer, Lady B often comes up to our house for a chat after dinner. She is the only person Charles doesn't mind coming to the house at that time because he knows he can go on reading the paper and she won't mind if he grunts. Indeed, Lady B has remarked more than once that she likes Charles' grunts, as they remind her of her own happy married life. She even goes so far as to say that she understands what they mean, but I think that is just vain boasting on her part. The night before last she arrived with her knitting. "If you get up, Charles, I'll never come here again," she said, and Charles, with a thankful sigh, abandoned the half-hearted attempt he was making to struggle out of his chair and disappeared behind the Times. "There's your chair," I said. Lady B hitched up her skirt at the back and sat down carefully. "One of the major troubles of my life just now," she said earnestly, "is trying to keep my two good skirts from bulging at the back. I always wear a very, very old one in the house." "So I see," said Lady B. "What has made you so tired tonight, Henrietta?" For I was playing patience, and Lady B knows I only do that when I am too exhausted to do anything else. "Bindweed." "Ah, I hope you admired me in the Wings for Victory procession?" "I thought you looked very fine, and I was glad to see that you had the courage to carry an umbrella." "People were rather unkind about it at first, but they were glad to shelter under it when that shower began. Henrietta, I don't want to interfere with your patience, but if you don't put that knave on the Queen, I shall go raving mad." I put the knave on the Queen. The people they really ought to have in processions, and when the great peace procession comes, I hope they will, are the shoppers. There was a grunt from Charles, and the Times quivered slightly. "Charles and I couldn't agree with you more," said Lady B. "Shopping baskets in one hand and ration books in the other, they would walk right at the end of the procession in a single file like a queue, and they'd get a rousing cheer if nobody else did." There was another grunt from Charles, who had spent the last Saturday morning shopping with me in our cathedral city. Charles wanted to order a tweed jacket before they all went comic, and I wanted a paintbrush. We found our city very much changed. The streets are crowded, as they always have been, but now, instead of strolling in the road and holding up the traffic, people hurry along the pavements with set expressions on their faces, while the motors whiz up and down at such a rate that Charles and I clung to each other on the curb and feared to launch away. There was hardly a Devon voice to be heard. Even in Charles Taylor's we detected an irreverent note, and the dignitary who used to serve us was no longer there. "Where is Mr. Clement?" we asked. "Gone," said the new man with a grin. "He was 78, you know." Charles was so annoyed at this levity that he refused the only cheerful check tweed left in the shop and chose a dull countryish cloth into which little flecks of red and yellow were woven without enlivening its appearance in any way. "Better take your measurements again," said the new man. "Most people have lost a bit round the tummy." Tummy indeed! The very walls shuddered while Charles, pale with disgust, suffered his waistcoat to be pulled up and the tape passed round his waist. "We haven't any No. 4 paintbrushes left," said the girl in artist's materials, who was also new and obviously considered herself Queen of the May. "See for yourself." And yawning a little, she pulled open the paintbrush drawer. Inside were 2 paintbrushes. One could have been used for painting a house, and the other for a very small miniature. Charles and I greeted our old friend the waiter with tears of recognition, but there wasn't any lunch. Yesterday had been market day, and there wasn't anything left. Sadly, we stepped into the street and threaded our patient way to a more expensive house. Could we have lunch? We asked meekly, standing on the mat. Authority looked us up and down. Yes, it thought it might manage something. Joyfully and effusively, we expressed our thanks and fought our way to the bar, which was full of people we didn't know. There, over drinks which called themselves gin and French, we cheered up a little. I think it is probably what is called hooch, said Charles, and it will make us blind. When I asked him what sort of blind, he said both sorts. Then we saw Geoffrey. Of course, it isn't fair to judge anybody's figure in battle dress, otherwise he looked just the same. I suppose you are drunk with power now you are a second lieutenant, I said. Then Charles kicked me under the table, and I noticed that there wasn't a pip on Geoffrey's shoulder, but a crown. This created such an atmosphere that I would have been glad to leave, but Charles said no, and we ordered our grill, and we would wait for it. And wait for it we did. When it arrived at last, it was quite good. So it ought to be, said Charles, at that price. Then I threw discretion to the winds and had some rice pudding, but it tasted of fish. And we came away. Who are all these people? Said Charles plaintively, after he had been pushed off the pavement and into the gutter for the third time. But we reached the garage at last and scrambled into our car like shipwrecked mariners into a lifeboat. It used to be fun, said Charles sadly, and we drove away. In the cathedral close there was a poster announcing music for that afternoon. I told Charles I would find my own way home and join the queue. Queuing is such a habit now that it holds no terrors, and it didn't seem long till we were all inside and the music began. Here was something which had not changed. Beauty and peace and comfort, and the gray walls of our beloved cathedral taking up the sound as they had taken up the prayers and songs of centuries, to give them back to bewildered worshippers in kindly blessing. Many people were in tears. I dropped in at Lady B's on the way home to tell her about the music. While I was there, a very small girl arrived at the front door. "Please," she said, "will you buy a ticket for our fashion play?" "Your what, dear?" said Lady B. "Fashion play, in the church." Lady B opened her bag. "You haven't got that absolutely right," she said, "but I'd like to buy a ticket." Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. June 16th, 1943. My dear Robert, the conductor and Faith are married. At the last moment, Faith developed qualms, doubts, and fears. First, she said she wanted to be married in a registry office, and when the conductor stoutly refused to be a party to such heathenish antics, she said she couldn't be married in our church because the face of a centurion in the east window always reminded her of her first husband. Lady B and I thought this a bit far-fetched, but in the end it was arranged that they should be married in a village church 5 miles away. "It's just like you, Faith, to make things as difficult as possible for everybody," said Charles crossly. "I thought I should be able to pop into the hospital on the way to the church, and now I've got to waste the whole afternoon driving miles away into the country." Faith's beautiful eyes filled with tears. "Of course, if you don't want to give me away, Charles," she said. "About flowers," said Lady B. "I thought delphiniums," said Faith. "You see, blue is my color. 2 huge bunches of mixed blues would look lovely against those whitewashed walls, don't you think? I've hired some blue carpet." It struck me that for somebody who is suffering from qualms, doubts, and fears, Faith had got everything very clearly arranged, and I began to understand why she had insisted on the village church. "I shall feel so awful walking up the aisle all alone," said Faith. "I was wondering, darling Henrietta, whether you would wear your long blue frock, it's such a lovely cut, and be my matron of honor. You see, I'm wearing powder blue, and a somber touch is just what is needed." "No, Faith," I said. "I love you very much, but I'm not going to be a somber touch at your wedding. Besides, you won't be alone. You'll have Charles." Charles said suddenly, "What am I going to wear?" And there was a horrible silence, because he always borrows the conductor's wedding garments when he has to dress up. "You can have the suit, old boy," said the conductor, too happy to be worried by such trifles. "Don't be silly," said Lady B. "You can't marry Faith in a pair of corduroy trousers." "He looks sweet in them," said Faith, "but they wouldn't go with my powder blue." "We might do a quick change in the vestry," said Charles. "Then I could walk up the aisle in the suit, and you could walk down in it, and the squander bug would fall dead in the porch." But Lady B said Charles must wear his best blue, and that was the end of that. I started very early for Faith's wedding because I hadn't been on a bicycle since the first year of the war, when I fell off, and I'd promised Faith to give the delphiniums a final touch before the service. As I wobbled painfully past the station, the passengers from the London train were just coming out, and suddenly I saw the awful Dan. This is an ex-suitor of Faith's whose unexpected release from an Italian prisoner of war camp a few weeks previously had given the conductor, and perhaps Faith too, some sleepless nights. One of the funny things about bicycling is that whenever you particularly don't want to run into something, you always do. And I found myself bearing down upon Dan at breakneck speed. "Get out of the way, Dan!" I shouted, but Dan stood fair and square in my path and took firm hold of the handlebars so that I shot forward and my face hit his chest, leaving a patch of powder on his uniform. "Not for the first time," said Dan, beating his chest so that quite a cloud of powder rose in the air. "I don't doubt it," I said coldly, for I had taken trouble with my face. "You still look a good deal nicer than usual," said Dan kindly. Then he peered closely at me and began to laugh. "You've gotten mascara on your eyelashes, you funny little thing," he said. "I'm going to a wedding," I said. "Faith's wedding, as a matter of fact," and I looked to see him wince. "Good," said Dan. "I like weddings." He wanted to ride my bicycle and make me sit on the handlebars, but I refused to do this. So he borrowed one from the porter, and we set off together, Dan with one hand between my shoulders, pushing me up the hills, so that we arrived at the village church in no time. After I had looked at the delphiniums, which were perfect, we went and sat in a sunny corner of the churchyard. "By the way, who is Faith marrying?" said Dan. "That conductor chap, I suppose?" I nodded. "You aren't sad, are you?" I said. "Sad? Me?" said Dan. "Why?" "I just wondered," she said. "She's wearing powder blue." "She would," said Dan. Nearly everybody came to Faith's wedding on bicycles. The hedge outside the village church was stacked with them, and a woman in one of the cottages opposite gave up her front room for people to tidy themselves up in before going into the church. Colonel Simpkins came in his little pony cart, which he hitched to the vicar gate, and the pony ate most of the vicar's hedge during the service. The conductor, who had never had the chance of appearing in the suit before because Charles was always wearing it, astonished us all by his magnificent appearance. Faith looked quite exquisite. Her eyes matched the delphiniums, and just the right somber touch was provided by Charles' blue suit. Everybody was moved by the sight, and I felt the tears coming into my own eyes. It is a mistake to cry even a little bit when you have mascara on your eyelashes. In less than a minute I was in agony, and the tears were pouring down my cheeks. Dan looked at me and then handed me a large, clean, white pocket handkerchief. The reception, which was held in Faith's house, was a tremendous success. There was no champagne, but a sort of cup, which had been brewed by Charles, produced a very hilarious spirit among the guests, and everybody, including Dan, kissed the bride a great many times. "What were you crying about in church?" said Mrs. Savernac to me, rather spitefully. "The conductor says he's going to keep on the choir." "She was wishing she'd married me instead of Charles," said Dan. "I quite enjoyed the wedding," said Charles to me that evening. "What did you think of the brew?" "Excellent and extremely potent. I enjoyed the wedding, too. Dan shoved me up the hills, and we sat in the churchyard and had a flirtation." "Dan would flirt with anything," said Charles. Then he yawned and opened the Times. Always your affectionate childhood's friend, Henrietta. And we'll hear more from Henrietta next time.